Man, sometimes when I'm bringing you the news, I'm just going through the headlines and reading the details, and it's just one horrible story after another, and it almost seems like a race to see who can get to hell first. So that we had the terror attacks, we're not so sure what the heck the Vegas one was motivated by. We just suspect terrorism because it happened in front of a Trump building with a Cybertruck, so maybe terrorists. The one in New Orleans, though, my God, just pure evil. We have a guy who, I guess right now the sort of story is he had a couple of IEDs, but they didn't go off, so maybe the backup plan was him driving into the crowd and then trying to shoot his way out. But on top of that, joining him in hell pretty soon are the people who set up these fake fundraisers for the victims, scammers. Set up fake fundraisers, GoFundMe account if, this is going to go to the victims' families, and then someone absconds with the money. Boy, y'all, like I said, can't get to hell fast enough, can you? Dr. Alex Del Carmen from Tarleton State, he's a criminologist. He's back on with the James Show. How do we know? You're a guy who has been observing criminal behavior for most of your adult life. How do we find which ones of these fundraisers are scams and which ones are legit?
There lies the $1 million question, right? So the idea is just to be able to go to the, GoFundMe accounts and see if, in fact, the individual making the request is legitimate. The problem is we have no way of really knowing that unless you actually know the nature of what they're asking for. Typically, what I recommend for people to do is to not go to those websites to fund relief efforts of some sort, but rather go to those that we actually already know that are in existence and are legitimate, such as the Red Cross and various others.
Let's talk about the type of person that would do that. I assume they have to be a sociopath, if not a psychopath. Am I just being too harsh with those terms?
No, I think you have to be, not only a little, but, a great deal of sociopathic-like behavior for you to be able to, first of all, use a tragedy such as this one to try to appeal to the good nature of the American people in order for you to scam people that in some cases they're giving all they've got, right? Because they're donating money that they probably shouldn't be donating in these very difficult circumstances, economically speaking. And so you have to have sort of a mindset that you don't care. You have no regards for people that will make that sacrifice. And then you lie on top of the actual misery that people are going through by missing their loved ones or perhaps in some cases, having lost all they have.
So let's talk about the mindset of the guy who was driving the truck. Was he a normal guy who got radicalized by an extreme version of a religion, or was he an already crazy person who just seemed to seize on an extremism that sort of justified his crazy thoughts?
So I don't think we have an answer as to, from a clinical perspective as to what exactly happened to this guy. But what I can tell you, just based on years of research and having dealt with these individuals before, is that this is a person that obviously was upset with our form of life, with our government, and started buying into sort of some of this international rhetoric that, these terrorist groups have, which is, how do you damage and do you hurt the United States in its vulnerable, areas, which is the American people, right? Innocent people. And so I think what we are likely going to find when the FBI is done with its investigation and we have all the facts in front of us is that this person slowly began to radicalize himself by virtue of watching videos, connecting perhaps with people overseas, and really beginning to sort of fantasize how he was going to be a martyr and a hero in this plight that they allegedly have against the United States.
I always feel like this is a chicken and egg exercise here, because was he a crazy person who seized on the violent ideas, or was he an otherwise normal person who you use the term self-radicalized, but did he make himself crazy, or was he already crazy?
I don't know that crazy, for me at least, it's not a word that I use to, provide a clinical diagnosis of people. If you're talking about mental illness, I think a lot of people suffer from mental illness that will never be engaging in criminal behavior, right? But I do think, however, that when it comes to these kinds of individuals, you have to have some degree of proneness of hatred, right, inside you, whether you're frustrated with the government or you're frustrated with something that happened to you by the government, and you begin to sort of buy into this rhetoric that, the enemy of the world is the U.S. government, then you have to go after it. And so it's really sad, because it almost requires for the person to abandon all the things that you would have assumed that this person was taught, growing up, such as decency, law-abiding behavior, and whatnot, and begin to sort of engage in this new radicalization, which is, the enamored idea that somehow you are going to be a hero and you're going to die for this cause, which is obviously flawed, evil, and not true.
Well, I think some of the hesitation on the part of the media to give you the full story in this is they're concerned about racial profiling, and if this is, if we can pin this on Islamic terrorists, how do we, root out other future terrorist attackers without profiling the Muslim community as a whole? And I'm talking to the guy who literally wrote the book on it. First, explain the book, and then how would you approach that?
Well, racial profiling is when somebody engages in the purposeful act of stopping, in the case of law enforcement, enforcing the law based on that individual's race or ethnicity, or religious affiliation. I don't think this, in my view, for the FBI or any kind of federal entity to have targeted this person based on some early signs that he was being radical, I don't think that would have necessarily violated this person's civil rights, when, the fact that he happens to be a Muslim and the fact that he happens to be a former soldier, a veteran, none of these things are competing facts to, or would have prevented the federal agencies from doing that. And I don't know that I would agree with anyone saying that, or having criticized the federal agency for engaging in racial profiling back then, if they would have investigated this guy. But I do get what you're saying, in the sense that I think the community has, largely bought into this sort of argument that somehow, if we do something against a particular person that belongs to a minority group, it must mean because we're racist, and that's obviously not the case.
Yeah, I would just like, maybe moving forward, can we pull over the guy flying the ISIS flag out the back of his truck? I consider that to be sort of a red flag. But metaphors aside, when I say you wrote the book on racial profiling, you actually are one of the guys that agencies turn to know where the boundaries are. What is determined by your book? Where are those boundaries?
Well, the boundaries are in the Constitution, right? I mean, I think, look, it's a reality that, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and I've said this in my book, 99.9% of law enforcement are honest, decent, hardworking people. And my book is really about making the case that most law enforcement are in that category, but that they are individuals that, just like any other profession, that we should have never allowed into the law enforcement community. And those individuals that we have allowed into the community of law enforcement, which is a noble, honorable community, I've never met a good cop that's told me that they want a bad cop next to them, right? So the idea is to be able to sort of filter them out if the process itself doesn't filter them. And so how do we do that? We look at data. We look at not necessarily who the officer is stopping, but how the officer is treating people, right? Is the Constitution prevailing as to the reasons why somebody got pulled over versus the officer feeling that you were, quote unquote, suspicious because of the type of car that you drove, or because of your skin color, or because of any other factor? But I do believe that in the end, the Constitution is the greatest if you want to call it, filter as to when we make, decisions that are politically motivated versus those that are illegal.
Dr. Alex Del Carmen, thanks for being on the James Show. Where do they find your work outside of WBAP?
So they can find it at the tarleton.edu website. That's where my email is, and some of my work is listed. So happy to engage in any conversations with your audience.
Fantastic. Appreciate your insights, Dr. Alex Del Carmen.